Seeking 7. I spent much of the rest of our first day at Northglade Keep luxuriating in soapy hot water, getting rid of the grime that had built up over the last few weeks of travel. It was certainly possible to wash on the roads, to keep yourself from becoming truly foul, but nothing beats having a chance to relax in scalding hot water for feeling refreshed. The selection of soaps and body wash, even legitimate shampoo meant for hair, was available. It certainly explains why Lorna's hair looked so silky. Not that access to it stopped my own brushing routine. It was better to rely on what was always available. The natural oils, and a little magic even if it was cheating, for keeping my own hair in good condition. Having a full-length glass mirror helped with that too. I'm still used to using the bottoms of Robin's pants, or a still pond, to get a reflection, that seeing myself so clearly was strange. I'd never had body dysmorphia, not even with just how different I was in this life compared to my last one, but it was still odd. Or maybe I did back then and didn't know? I'd never looked in the mirror and thought, that's me, or even, I like how I look, before. It was me, I could tell it was me, but it never felt right. Not that it felt wrong either. Staring myself in the mirror after getting out of the bath, one hand on my growing hips, of which had small, if noticeable definition now, I actually did like how I looked, even if it meant something horrible was still looming. Puberty's really here, huh? I muttered, looking myself over. My limbs looked a little gangly, not fully filled out for their length just yet, but I was starting to take on the shape of a young woman rather than a child. Gonna suck. I was not looking forward to periods, not one bit. At least this wasn't like Earth, where they were starting earlier and earlier. I might even get another couple of years of escaping them. On the other hand, there wasn't exactly a good selection of ways to deal with them. Being on the rag was a colloquialism for a reason. And then there was the hair growing everywhere thing that I didn't want. Surely there had to be a way for me to get rid of hair on my legs without having to shave. I hated shaving before. I didn't want to have to do it here if I didn't have to. I could grow hair just fine, but getting rid of it... worth looking into. What was the point of fantastical magical powers if they didn't make your life better? Wrapping myself up in the fluffiest of bathrobes, I made my way out of the bathroom. I didn't think Lady Mistmantle had particularly wanted to treat me as a noble guest. She certainly didn't greet me as one. But I was given a set of rooms besides Cadence, and along with that, the resources to do something I absolutely needed to do. It might have only been a couple of weeks since I left home, and started out on my journey, but I had already gone so far. And it would be a lie to say I hadn't missed Emma at times, that I'd never missed Celestine. I sat down at the writing desk and started penning 2 letters. It would be a while before they got back to Kiel Harbor and onto my family. But I needed to tell them, to show I hadn't forgotten, that for all I was gone, I was still little Emma's big sister, that I still remembered Celestine as a good teacher. I wasn't going to be my mother. Dear Emma and Celestine, I murmured as I wrote, frowning as something was off, then swatted myself with the feather of the quill. Duh. Oh. And Robin, Thomas, Marcus, and Rosalind too. There was a second letter I'd need to write while I was here, more important to the world, but less important to me. Over here! Vivian said, slipping ahead as she kept on doing by darting through the crowd that looked entirely used to the young girl's antics, and too certain of her status to say anything about the way she dodged and weaved, threatening to cause collisions. Come on, let's get you fitted! Got somewhere else to go after! A bell rang as she pushed open the door and strode inside. Large bay windows lit the shop, revealing a room chock full of tables displaying fabrics with a variety of patterns and, somewhat unusually, a pair of completed dresses hung up on mannequins. One thing that stood out to me was the quality. Nothing here was worse than what my mother had bought me from Mrs. Tilda, and most of it was blatantly better. There was also the faint taste of magic in the air. Arcane. All tightly bundled and spun into threads. Not so much I thought anyone was casting magic, but it was there. I'm not sure I can afford any of this, I muttered, looking around. Sure, there were a lot of tempting things here. Why wouldn't I want a pretty dress or something made to be magical? But I'd have to carry it along with me. And as nice as it'd be, it was well outside my price range. And none of the stuff here looks like traveling clothes. Part of the reason is so you have something to wear when Tobias returns. He'll want to eat with you and Caden, Lorna pointed out. Caden is going to be bare-chested, I protested. Does it really matter what I wear? Yes, Lorna said, rolling her eyes at me. He's a dwarf. He could get away with a full suit of armor if he wanted. So long as he's wearing trousers, or even just something to cover his nevers with, no one will really bat an eyelid. Isabel might grumble, but he won't get held to a normal standard of courtesy. She prodded me with a finger. You, on the other hand, will. As my mother used to say, a young woman, especially a Gilnean, must look her best whenever she can, for it is her first weapon of choice. Still think that's stupid. Better to have a sword, Vivian shot back. I prefer magic, personally, I said with a smile. I could understand the sentiment, especially for a noble girl. But for the peasantry, and a witch even more so, it seemed less relevant. I could take care of myself to a higher standard than most, but it certainly wasn't my first weapon of choice. What she said also put into my head the question of whether the Wildhammers, or any of their kin, ever wore kilts. It'd certainly look good on Caden. A few of the older Headlander clans wore them, but it really wasn't many. Mostly those that lived right on the foothills and Glen's Duskrock Mountains. A shame. Kilts were cool. So I'm really not sure... Shush, Lorna said, starting to frown. You're not talking me out of buying you replacement clothes. You're already wearing borrowed things because you lost yours saving my father's people. You need to be rewarded for that, and as father isn't here, it falls to me. And this is how I'm doing it. One set of traveling clothes and a good but hard-wearing dress. Her eyes bored into mine, holding me in place until I nodded, at which point she started smiling again. Good. Now where's the proprietor? The sign did say they were closed, Vivian said, coming back from her snooping around the shop. But I expected someone to be here. Did we break in? I asked, glancing back at the door. It hadn't been locked, had it? Vivian scoffed. My father's castle. They pay rent, I can come in if I want. I grimaced. That was not a good attitude to have. And what does the owner have to tell you from a thief in the dark, Vivi? If someone broke into your rooms when you had indicated no one was to come in. Gwen's right, Lorna said, crossing her arms and staring at her friend. You have the right, but that does not mean it's right to use it. The way she said it made me think it was an often repeated line, something she had heard time and again. It'd be no bother, miss, a man said, coming down the stairs. I was just making tea for my missus. She's with Babe and feeling poorly, so I closed the shop for a bit. She'd be fine now, though. He looked a little haggard, but put on a winning smile. His eyes focused on Vivian. What can I do to help the little lady today? Vivian quickly shot us a smug smirk before answering. We need a dress for our new friend here. She's a witch, so something a little magical. And she has to ride a griffin with a Wildhammer Thane too. She's on a journey with him and fought against gnolls with her magic, so she needs good traveling clothes too. Something warm, Lorna added. It got quite cold up there. That was balmy compared to my first flight, I said. The man nodded, his eyes flickering over to me to take in who he needed to work on. Then he did a double take. This? He mumbled quietly as he stared at me. I was confused myself for a moment before he shook his head and got back on topic. Sorry, miss. Got some pier cloth me old master sent me off with. That's good hard-wearing stuff. Not as good as Dalaran's room cloth, but I saw it's a fair shot against apprentice-made mage weave. Warm too, always. Who was Liz? That sounds great, Vivian said. Can we get something in this style? She said, shifting the dress on one of the mannequins. It was quite pretty. A white button-up blouse and shawl with long puffy sleeves over a deep green set of multi-layered skirts. I think it'll look good on her. Maybe a red rather than a green. I like the green, I said. I'd never liked wearing red much. The color was obnoxious. That was my wife's project. It's not actually meant for anyone, he said, rubbing his chin. Could sort it out in a day with measurements. Pier cloth, don't know why, but she wanted to make a dress for a young girl. He shrugged. Been hanging around for months, so if you want it, we could get it done quick. If you can step on a stool, miss? It took a few minutes, and a fair bit of idle conversation between me and the girls before he had my measurements. The dress was just a little too big, which was actually pretty good considering I wasn't quite done growing yet. With a rush order, Lorna insisted it would be ready tomorrow, along with sodding lingerie. Growing up was honestly barely worth the hassle. The idea that I was going to have genuinely, properly advertised as enchanted clothes, warm, stain resistance, and durability so it wasn't that special, was kind of weird. They didn't even mention price. Lorna just asked the bill to be sent to the castle, where Tobias could take it from her allowance. I'm still not sure when I'll get to wear it, I said as we left the shop. The dinner, sure, but... If nothing else, I'd like you to meet my father. He's always complaining about the lack of healers, having to pay extra to lure priests away from the cathedral just to do basic service at our chapel. Lorna said bitterly. After the old deacon died and his apprentices ran off to Lordaeron, we haven't had any permanent priest in our lands, just the occasional lay priest, entirely without magic, who tend to the people but not their needs. I was about to say something when Vivian started shaking her head at me, meeting my eyes with a pleading stare. I nodded back and we kept on walking in silence for a little while, letting Lorna mull over whatever was on her mind. Can we take a detour? Vivian eventually asked. I know someone who got hurt in the forge. Sure, I said. Really, I should have thought of it myself. Actually, can you speak to someone and make clear I'm available for healing? Physical wounds are easiest. I can't do much about diseases, sadly. Vivian smiled brightly, practically radiating happiness. Okay, but let's go help Todd first. This way, she cried, slipping through the crowds again. Lass, Gaden said, nodding to me as I came down the stairs. He was still bare-chested as ever, even in the presence of a fully suited Tobias and elegantly dressed Lorna, Vivian and Lady Mistmantle, though it was clear he'd put some effort into grooming and braiding his beard, and it almost seemed like he touched up his tattoos somehow, as they were standing out more. Took you a wee bit longer than expected. Trouble with the dress, I grumbled, trying to cling on to my dignity. I've never worn something this dressy before. The dress was lovely, fit perfectly, and you couldn't even see the spots the tailor had left in for me to grow into. But I did not understand petticoats. After half an hour of struggle trying to get everything on and sitting right, I'd given in and asked for help from one of the maids. With how amused she had been with the whole thing, especially my embarrassment over needing help, I wasn't going to forget any of it anytime soon. Lord and Lady Mistmantle, I said, giving them a proper curtsy. Lorna, Vivian, thank you for the gift. The maid had also insisted I learn how to properly greet a lord, rather than going by what I thought was right. Not that it had been all that far off to begin with. Magus Arivin, Lord Mistmantle nodded to me. It is we who must thank you. Not only did you aid the good Thane in rescuing the people of Torrens Crossing, you spent the last 2 days aiding my people with their ills. and though it was perhaps not customary, we found the rites she performed for the dead. May they rest eternal. May they rest in his halls eternal, I repeated. It was interesting he called me Magus, but it was the closest title, which was considered derogatory in some ways. Not in the old tongue, sure, and it was fairly neutral in Gilnean, but in Arathorian common it was. Even if your own contributions were not as martial as Thane Kindfeather, only an ignorant fool would disregard the value of healing in or after combat. It was not just the paladins that won the Alliance victory. The priests who tended or injured at the edge of each field contributed greatly. Lord Mistmantle gestured and nodded at Caden respectfully. And, of course, our stalwart allies from other lands. Lass helped in battle plenty too, Caden said with a shrug. Cannot complain about a third of our foes being trapped in place before the fight even starts. No Archmage's blizzard to be sure, but serviceable. Just needs to take better care of herself. Indeed, Miss Mantle conceded the point. Any time you wish for the hospitality of my house, you are welcome to it, Magus Arevin. And mine, Lorna said, butting in a little awkwardly. The people of Turin's Cross were Crowley men and women. I'm glad you liked the gift, but Father will want to show his own appreciation someday. I smiled at her. I would like to see your home too. Perhaps I shall visit one day, I said truthfully, though it wasn't half the reason. Lorna Crowley, daughter of Darius Crowley. He wasn't a major figure or character, but he was memorable. The man who led the last stand in the cathedral when the Worgen claimed the player. The head of the Ghanaian resistance against the Forsaken, and the man who started the Northgate Rebellion, and sent aid to Jaina's Kalimdor expedition in the form of the Ghanaian Brigade. Lorna was a good person and I liked her, but I wasn't going to live in denial, claiming that I didn't have ulterior motives after thinking things over. Darius Crowley was a high-ranking noble who not only could help me and act on my foreknowledge, he was someone predisposed to do so. The Northgate Rebellion lost in canon, and there was hardly enough information about it to really swing it one way or another. But at the very least, I could get a message to Jaina's expedition that way if I failed to change things sooner. Whether I would join the Ghanaian Brigade or not, I didn't know. I could make a difference on Kalimdor, find the Night Elves, maybe stop Cenarius' death. But here, the Eastern Kingdoms, Gilneas was my home, and I knew what happened here. Everything went to hell and no one was there to stop it. It wasn't a choice that had a right answer, just varying degrees of wrong answer, and far enough in the future that I didn't have to deal with it just yet. Lorna smiled back, a wonderfully beaming thing framed by the carefully formed bangs she was wearing today. That sounds wonderful. Well, I've had an idea of sorts. Lady Mistmantle clapped her hands loudly as Vivian showed up, interrupting Lorna. There you are, daughter, she said with a faint frown, eyeing the girl who looked like she'd just been barely stuffed into her own dress. We've been waiting. Now that we're all here, shall we move on to dinner? Vivian wilted under her mother's gaze, staring at her feet mulishly. Only got told Father was back 20 minutes ago, she complained. That is your own fault for gallivanting off with the blacksmith's apprentice again, Lady Mistmantle said, her glower strengthening with her disapproval. Husband? I suppose we should, Lord Mistmantle said with a tired nod, and we started filing into the dining hall. Much like the rest of Lord Mistmantle's home, his dining hall wasn't excessively ostentatious. At least not so much it felt absurd. It was still bigger than all of Celestine's living space combined, an entire home if you counted the unused height of the hall, but it was tasteful. A few but not too many hunting trophies, boars and stags mostly, paintings of their family, including Vivian's older brother who was serving as Lord Crowley's assistant. While it was clearly rich, it also felt warm, and as we moved to sit at the Lord's table, the atmosphere exuded by the soldiers and locals who had been invited to partake in the celebration of the Gnoll's defeat, done primarily in Caden's honor, was clearly positive. I am almost surprised you remained here this long, Caden, Lord Mismental said as we sat down and the first course was served. I had half thought you would be off back to Airy Peak to see your clan before I returned. Had considered it, true, Caden replied. But Feathers be enjoying your stable's good treatment, and the last needed a break. Can I say I didn't appreciate the access to your cellar neither? I do hope you've left some for me, Lord Mismental joked. Might I ask how the two of you came to travel together? They met in Kill Harbour, father. Gwen is looking for her mother who abandoned her, Vivian said. She and Lorna had already gotten the full story from me, and despite us both being there, she excitedly went on to retell it. There were a couple of points where I had to correct her embellishments. I wasn't that brave, stepping up to the Griffin Pride's matriarch like I had, but overall she told it well. Lady Mismental started frowning deeply as the story closed out. Entirely improper for a young girl, she said, staring at me with a mixture of disapproval and pity. The former I was used to, the latter was just insulting. Exactly how young are you, Miss Erwin? As much as I wanted to ignore her, it was her table. I've 12 winters, my lady, I said blandly. 12? Caden blurted, taken aback and suddenly staring at me. Lass, you're 12 years old? Yes, I said, feeling rather confused. Kisnak, well... He looked rather flummoxed as he continued staring at me. You didn't look so young to me. Puts your confidence in a new light, it does. He trailed off, mumbling about putting a child in danger. It does indeed, Lord Mismental said, a curious expression on his face. You weren't aware she was so young. I do remember some dwarves I fought besides had trouble telling my own age, not knowing I didn't have a beard because I went clean-shaven even in wartime rather than being too young to do so. Caden huffed loudly. I made that mistake myself once. When you lot get above a certain height, it's all guesses for me. At least with men, beards say they be of some age. Should have asked. Or fool me. Well, I mumbled. There was a small part of me that felt irritated he was thinking differently because he learned I was too young. But mostly I understood. If it was Lorna, Vivi, or really anyone else my age, he would be entirely right. And with how close I'd come to dying because I wasn't properly trained, it was true for me too. I was setting out regardless before I met Caden, as I'd finished my apprenticeship. And as my teacher had promised me, she told me where my mother had planned to go. So I was already going to leave. Caden just made it faster and safer. My stomach churned unpleasantly, and I stopped to pick at my food. It was good food, delicious. But I was starting to wonder what would have happened if I hadn't met Caden. Would I have ended up in trouble with the gnolls, but alone and unable to survive? It wasn't worth dwelling on. Nor was my mother. I would find her, or I wouldn't. Irwin Arvin, if you've ever heard the name? No, I do not believe I have, Lady Mismental said with a frown. A horrid thing, leaving one's own child. I wish you would leave sometimes, Vivian muttered under her breath. Thankfully, while I had heard it, the lady of the house hadn't. It wasn't something I liked hearing, nor Lorna, looking at her own expression. No matter that what Mother had done was horrible, cruel, evil, no matter how much it hurt, I still loved her. I wanted to curl into her side, to hear the beat of her heart and fall asleep to it again. I wanted to show her how much I'd grown, and hear her say how proud she was of me. I wanted to tell her how much she had hurt me and why it hurt, to tell her I love her, and scream at her that if she loved me back she should never have left. It is, I said weakly, my heart racing and my eyes prickling with tears. But I miss her nonetheless. Lord Mistmantle quickly changed the topic, turning to ask Caden about his own experiences in the Second War as a veteran. I was glad of it, finding it interesting even if I was only half listening, as I slowly nibbled my way through dinner. There were more spices and seasoning than I'd ever had before in his life. Kiel Harbor had a fair number of ships from the rebuilding Stormwind, and even the famed South Sea Tel Eben Islands, where such things were grown, but they didn't make them cheap. Kilneas just wasn't the right place for growing most of these things. If I ever wanted to eat a proper curry again, I'd have to grow my own, probably. I'd need a greenhouse, but it was doable. Having spicy food again would be nice. Eventually, I noticed Caden beginning to grow exasperated with Vivian's line of questioning. How many orcs did you kill? Have you fought an ogre? What was it like fighting dragons? He didn't struggle with the answers, but they seemed to bring back bad memories for him. Lorna, I said, trying to divert the conversation for Caden's benefit. I was wondering why you are here rather than with your father. Most of the time the two had been asking about me, so I'd never gotten around to asking. That, and I just genuinely accepted she was here, and the reason why wasn't that important. Father's in the capital, attending to the king at court. As I'm not yet old enough to have had my debut, he left me behind, she said with a tinge of bitterness. Tobias is an old friend of father's, so rather than stay at the estate alone, I came here. I couldn't help but think she'd hardly be alone in a house likely filled with several dozen servants. But if she meant friends and peers, then it made some sense. Lorna's mother, the late Matilda, has been gone for many years now, Lady Mistmantle said, smiling at Lorna. She has spent many a summer here while her father was busy, including when my Tobias and Lord Crowley were off in the war. Sometimes I think of her as my second daughter. Vivian scowled, her fork clicking loudly as she stabbed at her plate. Yes, Lorna said, though with less certainty. Vivian's been my best friend for years, since she was just a baby, really. I decided to not step on whatever landmine that was. I did see Duke Kendron's son in Kiel Harbor. Caden got him quite drunk. Ah, was that the lad's name? Caden said. He'd be slurring badly when he introduced himself, or maybe it'd just be the accent. Which was how I met Caden to begin with. They were taking a ship to the capital. Something about Prince Liam's coming of age celebration is what I heard. I wanted to see the prince, Vivian grumbled, Lorna whispering her own agreement. Lord Mistmantle hummed. That is part of it, but not a reason to call all the higher lords like His Majesty did. It is an undertaking for the Marleys to make their way south to the capital, and yet they did. I and Darius suspect it has something to do with the rumours that have been circulating. Godfrey, Walden and their lot have been complaining about the taxes being given to the Alliance. His words felt like a stone had been dropped into my stomach. It was already happening. Gen was planning the wall. I knew the wall was finished 3 or 4 years before the Third War, but how long did it take to build? How long did I have left? King Greymane isn't thinking of leaving, is he? He was always going to, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. With the latest news that Silvermoon has departed the Alliance, I have no doubt he is considering it. Darius and Lord Marley will argue against it, of course, but... Lord Mistmantle sighed. His Majesty was scarcely convinced of the Alliance's necessity to begin with. Can I say I'd heard that the elves had left? Must have spread out after I flew from home, Caden said, his brow furrowing. And here I was hoping to find no holding in Allied land. I know the same bellyaching from back at the peak, but didn't think it would be so strong as to hold the water here. He stabbed into his steak, lifting it up and tearing a piece off with his teeth. There was a spark of anger in his eyes, not directed at any of us, but something distant. I was there at Blackrock, when the blasted orcs ambushed Lofar. Got to watch them get overrun and die. I remember the war, how we damn nearly lost. The Alliance was the only reason any of us are alive, and some wee skunners are out to tear it apart just because they didn't want to cough up some coin? What a waste. Some say we should have just killed all the orcs, left them to rot and die rather than pay good coin to house them, waste good harvests on feeding them. Lord Mismental said, though the utter lack of conviction in his voice told me he wasn't of the opinion himself. Those people are damned fools. We had the orcs beat, the horde beat, but they weren't dead. Caden spat. Half of them still hung out in Blackrock, with the Dark Irons keeping him safe. Couldn't break the mountain if we tried. Cost too many men to do as much as we did on the ash-blasted field. Nah, killing her would have just pissed the rest off harder. Dragonmaw is still about, Warsong are still about, Burning Bloody Blade are still about. The ones in the camp ain't hurting no one, and we didn't have to break ourselves killing babes to win. I have no love for the orcs. I wish them as far from my lands as they could be. But I remember finding one of their children. It was during the second half of the war, when the orcs came back. Lord Mismantle's grip on his cutlery tightened and his wife put a hand on his arm. Just a child. Green, oddly shaped, so strange. But still just a child. I only wish they had not destroyed their world so we can send them back to their homes, far from us. But we lost that option, Caden murmured. Along with the best of us. The sons of Lothar, Mismental nodded. Light guide them to peace in that far-off realm. Ancestors bless Skyrie to carry our Haithane home, Caden whispered, touching one of the runes on his shoulder. The table fell quiet, and while the meal remained delicious, the silence didn't ever fully abate. The weight of it was said stifling the few halting attempts at conversation that occurred after it.